So this morning we're going to be covering a great deal of information in a short period of time. So I'll tell you right up front, I'm going to do kind of a brief description of where we came from in the first 6 chapters, and then we'll go right into the 10 plagues. And I got a slide that'll kind of help us work through those in a timely manner. So first of all, we begin with in Genesis 1. Exodus 1. I guess I ought to be in the right book. Exodus 1. Pharaoh had worried about the Israelites, the Hebrews, increasing greatly. We talked about from when they came in at 70 to where they are currently at 3 million people, that they became a threat. And so Pharaoh assigned taskmasters and tried to make their life harsh. They had many afflictions, their work. Then, we see in the end of chapter 1 where he even tries to kill the firstborn sons and then the sons of the Hebrews. And then in chapter 2, we see the birth of Moses. We see the story of Moses, how he's put in the river Nile, and then he's rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, raised by her, until the time around 40 years old where he sees the Egyptian beating the Hebrew, kills him, and as we remember in that story a couple of weeks ago, flees to Midian, and then there in Midian he marries and has children. I think one thing at the end of chapter 2 that I thought it's just a very key moment is where it says, God hears Israel's groaning and cries and help, and he remembered his covenant. Key point. Then we go into chapter 3. God appeared to Moses in the burning bush. God said he's seen their affliction and he's heard their cries. God tells Moses what he wants him to do. And he tells them his plan. And then he introduces himself. I am who I am. Tells them to tell the people of Israel. If they tell you who sent me, or if they ask you who sent you, Moses, tell them I am who I am. Then we go into further on in chapter 3, and God lays out his plan. A couple of things I want to do to just kind of get started is, one, I want us to see that God laid out his plan ahead of time. Anybody who studies Exodus, there's no surprises. Everything is given to Moses ahead of time and told to the Israelites ahead of time. Now, whether they heard and listened and heard, but it was told to them. In Exodus 3:16 through 21, Moses goes to the elders. God tells him to go to the elders, and he says, "Go and gather the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up out of your affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now, please, let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to our Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not listen to you unless he is compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it, and after that he will let you go. And I will give you the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you will not go empty-handed. So he tells this to the Israelites, and so they believed, and they were, they thought our prayers have been answered. We're going to be removed from this affliction. So then they go and gather with the elders, and they go to Pharaoh. They go to tell him this story. And in Exodus chapter 5, when Moses and Aaron met with Pharaoh, just as God had instructed them, this is what Pharaoh said. But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord. And moreover, I will not let them go. Let Israel go." Key thing there. We see in the first part, God lays out his plan. Second part, here's Pharaoh says, "I don't know your Lord. I don't know the Lord. And I'm not going to let you go." So now we've got God saying this is what he's going to do. We got Pharaoh saying, "I challenge that. I'm not going to let you go." So after that, Pharaoh does a little more. He increases their hardship. You remember where he tells them, now you have to gather your own straw, but you still have to get the same number of bricks. He increases the hardship on the people. So even the Israelite people begin to turn and say, why has God done this to us? Why we stink in the presence of Pharaoh? So they start to doubt that God is going to deliver them. And then in Exodus 7, 4, and 5, God comes back and he says, "Pharaoh will not listen to you." So God knows what's going to happen here. It's not a surprise. This is a plan. "Pharaoh will not listen to you. And then I will go and lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt." By great acts of judgment. "The Egyptians shall know that I am Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out my people of Israel." So again, he reiterates, this is what he's going to do. It will happen. So we get through, that's the first 6 chapters. I know there's a lot left out, but that was kind of some of the key points. And then you get to chapter 7, and you start getting to the 10 plagues. And the 10 plagues is what we're going to be covering today. A lot of material, so I've got a couple of things that I'm going to use, but a lot of material to get through. So let's go ahead and start. So in Exodus 7:17, it says, "Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood." So that's the first introduction to a plague. And again, I said before, there's going to be 10 plagues. So I have a chart, which I'll put up here to help us kind of go through these 10 plagues. Like I said, a lot of material. So. But there's a lot of information in here, and I want to get through it. But I want a couple of key things. One, we'll talk about what the plague is. Two, God says in his statement, I will make you know that I am Lord. And you heard Pharaoh say, "I don't know this Lord. I don't know him." So one, God needs to make sure that they know he is the Lord, first and foremost. The pagans, the Egyptians, they had a lot of pagan gods that they worshipped. They didn't worship God. They worshiped these pagan gods. So in these 10 plagues, he's going to make himself known. He's going to make their gods worthless. I'm going to describe the plagues, and then I'm going to talk about kind of the severity of the plagues. So, first plague, First plague was turning the Nile into blood. This was a judgment on the Egyptian god Happy, god of the Nile. What happened in this plague? The fish died. The water was turned blood. The fish died. The land stank. It was an unpleasant occurrence. And so what happens? Pharaoh calls in the magicians, and he says, and they say, "We can do this," and they turn a small amount of water into blood. Well, he's okay with that. He's like, "Okay, that appeases me. I'm gonna go, and no, you cannot leave." So he turns them into blood. Second plague is frogs. That is a judgment on Hecate, the goddess of fertility, who had a head of a frog. Pleasant sight. Frogs were sacred in Egypt. They were not allowed to kill a frog. So in this plague, they strike the Nile. Frogs come out of the Nile, take over the whole land. Houses are filled. Their sofas are filled. Their eating boards are filled. They're overwhelmed with frogs everywhere, and they can't do anything about it. So the land is, was just covered. So what does Pharaoh do? He calls his magicians again, and he said, and they work their what is called their secret arts, and they do the same thing in a smaller amount. They cannot do the same plague, but they do a small one. They get some of the frogs to come out of the Nile. That's the first two plagues. Something I kind of find funny. If you think about it, if you were given a plague, if you were having a plague, and they said, "Okay, here's these two plagues. I'm going to turn the Nile into blood. You're not going to have any drinking water. It's going to stink. I'm going to bring frogs over your whole land. You're going to be overwhelmed with frogs." And these two magicians, their solution to that was, we're going to turn more water into blood, and we're going to bring more frogs up on the land. I think it's funny because what they did would have been much more useful if they had said, "Pharaoh, we're going to turn this blood water, into drinking water, and we're going to make these frogs go back in the Nile." It would have been much better for Egypt, but in turn they made it worse for Egypt. The third plague, Moses tells Aaron, strike the ground, and the dust of the land became gnats. And every human was covered, every animal was covered. Can you imagine? Have you ever been where there's like here, there's a lot of mosquitoes, and they're just everywhere, and they're just bugging you? Imagine a land that's covered with gnats. And they're everywhere. They're in your house, they're on your food, they're on your animals. So what does Pharaoh do? He gets his magicians, and they try to do this, and they can't do this. They can't do this act. So they're now, they have no power. They're showing that they cannot do the plague just as God is doing the plague. And another interesting thing they say, this is the finger. They tell Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. These magicians acknowledge they can't do this. They don't have this power. This is the power of God, the finger of God. So those first three plagues would have been very bothersome. It says in the Bible, or at the last verse of chapter 7, that the blood of the Nile lasted for a week, 7 days, and that they had to dig water along the side of the Nile. That would have been bothersome to have to dig up the Nile and try to get water to drink. The second one, the frogs everywhere, that would have been bothersome. Whenever Pharaoh says, ask Moses to ask for forgiveness, and the way God answers that is He kills all the frogs. So now they got all these dead frogs that are stinking. So they have to, rake them up and put them in heaps. And so very bothersome. A lot of stench, smell, you can just imagine. Gnats, don't have to say how bothersome that would be. So the fourth plague, we're going to kind of, I want you to see this progression of severity. We go into the fourth plague, and it's the plague of the frogs. And as we go into these next three, these are going to be seen as more painful, even leading in some cases to death. The fourth plague is flies. This was a judgment on Khepri, god of creation, who had a head of a fly. Something interesting happens here. Not only could these magicians not do it, but now this is the first plague where God makes a distinction between Israel and Egypt. He sets them apart and says, the flies will not infest my people. Egypt will be consumed with them. So they were protected from the house. The places, the Egyptians, their places were just swarmed. It says that they were infested. They were just, everywhere you walked, everywhere in your house, just covered with flies. And this is the first time that Pharaoh starts to do something interesting. He starts to try to negotiate. He says, Moses, go and sacrifice in the land. So what he's telling them is, I'm not going to let you go 3 days with all your people, but go in the land and sacrifice. Well, that's not what Moses was told to do. Moses replies, we can't do that in the land. Sacrificing in the land would be an abomination to the Egyptians because of their belief in all these gods of the animals. So, he said, we would all be stoned if we did that. He says, we won't do that. We have to go 3 days out, just as our Lord has commanded us. So then Moses refuses to let them go. Fifth plague is livestock. Hathor, the judgment is brought on Hathor, the goddess of protection, which her head was a cow. Again, the Israelites were not impacted, so they were not affected by this. You can imagine what it looked like over here in the land of Goshen. They're not impacted. Over here in Egypt, total devastation. The Egyptians' livestock were infested or died. So, their livelihood, their economy was all being impacted. So this was having a big effect on them. And something else happens. Pharaoh sends somebody and he says, go and check this. I want to go over here to the land of the Israelites and verify. I want to know, is their area being, affected by these plagues? And he gets a report back, no, they are not. So he sees that, my magicians can't do this. I'm being plagued in so many different ways, and severity. My land is, being pummeled, but the Israelites are being kept safe. The sixth plague, boils. I thought when I was reading this, I thought this was interesting. He tells Moses to go and take the dust from the kiln and to toss it in the air, to throw it in the air. And I got that image of what's the basketball player's name? LeBron. He always takes the chalk and throws it up. Moses throws up this soot, and it becomes boils on all of the people of Egypt and their animals. Now, this was a judgment on the goddess of medicine, Isis, and the goddess over disease, Sekret. Again, Israelites are unharmed. They're set apart. And the Egyptian people, their culture placed a great emphasis on cleanliness, and this having all these boils would have made them unclean. They would have not, that would have impacted their, I guess you'd say their worship. Excuse me. So then, we go through this phase, this progression. Now we've gone from bothersome, we go into pain, the painful. Now we're going to go into the seventh plague, and we're going to start seeing destruction and death. And in the seventh plague, it was hell, and I believe it said hell and fire was rained down from heaven, like it never been seen or never will be seen. I was reading this verse and I started thinking of the storms we had not so long ago. I remember on the news of watching all these, they're showing all these tornadoes, this rain, this heavy water, 7, 8 inches of rain. And they put up this one little graph and it said lightning strikes. And it said, 5,980 lightning strikes in 5 minutes. And I thought, okay, so can you imagine what it must have been like for the hail and what I can only imagine would be lightning of fire coming down that had never been seen and never will be seen again. What that must have been like. There's something that before I go into what it did that I think is very important. This is the first plague where God actually, through Moses, gives a warning. Actually tells for those that listen to go and put their animals and their slaves in their house. Because tomorrow I'll bring this plague. And for those people who listened, they hurried and put their animals up and their slaves up. For those that didn't, they were destroyed. Again, it's God, even in this time of these plagues, I think we can really start to see that he was showing them some mercy for those who would listen, which is so key to us as we walk through our walk. And then this would have beaten down everything. This would have destroyed what in there it says it destroyed the flax and the barley, and the living things. The flax and barley would have been what they would have used for clothing, for comfort, things things in their homes. But that would have impacted that part of their life. In the next plague, they had the locusts, and the locusts were a judgment on Seth, the god of disorder. Now, the plague of the locusts would have been, they came in and they did whatever had not been destroyed. Now they're coming in and they're eating up everything else. They're eating all the green, all the lift. I mean, the land, just imagine, I've seen a few locusts, but imagine the whole ground, everything out there covered in locusts, in their houses. Everywhere they go, there's locusts. And they consumed everything. They ate up everything. I've seen videos where there's been these huge swarms of locusts go into a field, and they show it after, and it's just bare. There's nothing. And that's what Egypt was. It was bare. This would have affected their livelihood. This would have affected they weren't going to have a harvest this year. They weren't not going to have any food other than what they'd already put up, but they would not have a harvest this year. There would be no commerce. There would be no sale of goods. This would have affected really their livelihood. This would have really impacted the level of confidence they would have had in their future. The ninth plague is darkness. This is a judgment on the god Ra, god of the sun, which is the most worshipped god other than Pharaoh. Again, there's a distinction in the land of Goshen. There's light. The Israelites going about their normal business. Egypt has a darkness brought on that could be felt. Have you ever been out on a day when it's just kind of a misty, wet day and you can feel it. You can just walk around and you can just feel it. This was such a darkness that they could feel that darkness. And this darkness for the Egyptians would have represented death, a judgment, and hopelessness. So after this darkness is lifted, Pharaoh again starts to negotiate. He starts to say, earlier he negotiated for them to go in the land. He later, and I missed the point, but he later goes on and negotiates and says, your men can go, but your women and children have to stay. Again, Moses says no. He says that's not the plan that God gave us. Then he says now, Pharaoh says to him, okay, you can take your women and children, your old and your young, but you need to leave your animals. You can probably imagine, he's probably thinking, we've been pretty much wiped out. Y'all have all this animals. We need you to leave them. And his reply to that is, no, we will go with our old and young, our male and female. We will go with our animals. Because when we get there, we don't know what God's going to ask us to, how he's going to ask us to serve him, what animals are we going to need to use in our sacrifices. So again, he is not open for negotiation. The 10th plague, as I said, as in the progression of severity, the 10th plague is death. It's the death of the firstborn. Now, I won't be today going into all of the 10th plague, but I'll just introduce a little bit of it. But this would have been a judgment on Pharaoh. He believed to be the ultimate power. It was believed in their culture that he was a descendant of the gods. So this would have been a judgment on him. Things changed a little bit with the distinction. There is a distinction, but this is a distinction that requires an act of faith. In this one, they're not separated and kept out of the plague by just being an Israelite. They are told what they will have to do if they don't want to be impacted by the plague. And again, that goes on, and I don't want to step too much on next week's sermon, but so there will be an act of faith that will need to take place. So, a couple of things. We kind of skimmed through the 10 plagues. One thing I want you to understand, this wasn't a short-term thing. A lot of people wonder, how long were the plagues? The first one says it was a week because, it says at the end of the week. The next plague started. I did some research, and it said that these plagues were most likely over a duration of about 9 months. This wasn't a quick thing. It would have started in July or August, around the time the Nile would flood each year. That would have been the time where the frogs and all that would have been abundant. And then it would have ended in April, which is Passover month. So there would have been a long duration. So the number 10 is a significant number in biblical numerology. It represents a fullness of quantity. The Egyptian plagues mean in 10 plagues that they were completely plagued. They were desolated. They were plundered. They were just beat down. There was no food, no animals. Their houses were infested. Their water was undrinkable. Their land was a stench. They had no future. They had no clothing. They had no food. Their economy was decimated. It was a complete devastation. So 10 times, these 10 plagues, through Moses, God allows Pharaoh the opportunity to repent. 10 times. And to worship the one true God. And 10 times, Pharaoh, because of his pride, he refuses. And he receives the judgments. I think there's a lesson that last week John had mentioned this verse, and I had told him after the sermon, I said, hey, you stole my verses. But there's a verse where it says, do not be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. And I think Pharaoh was hardened by that deceitfulness of that sin. If you read, and I encourage you to go back and read these chapters 7 through 11, up to 12. Read these chapters. There's a lot of depth through how much Pharaoh was just hardened by this deceitfulness of sin. Exodus 4:23 says, and I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. This was in Exodus 4. He knew going through these 10 plagues, even though he saw it over and over. He went out and he saw their land wouldn't be touched. He saw these plagues happening. Every one of them were happening just as he had been told they were going to happen. And he's been told that if he doesn't let them go, his firstborn son would die. His heart was so hardened that he would let his son die. I mean, think about that. Think about your children. I can't imagine the kind of hardness that would take, the kind of pride that you'd have to allow that to happen. And we have to ask ourselves, what is our condition of our heart? Pharaoh's heart was very hard. What is our condition? God's plan was perfect. His timing was perfect. Last week, John said, Moses' time was perfect. Time at 40 was perfect for what it took place. The time with 80 was perfect. This plan was perfect. It was worked out to everything and met every goal that God had intended. Through this plan, he established that he was worthy. He was a God that was worthy. He also showed that their gods were worthless. The things that this world, the gods that so many times we chase after are worthless. He is worthy. God's timing is perfect. His plan is perfect. After the seventh plague, it said something interesting. It said, for this reason, he was telling Pharaoh, for this reason I have raised you up, so that I may show my wonders. For this reason, he put Pharaoh in that position, so he could show his wonders. What was Pharaoh's legacy? It was disobedience, it was death, and it was destruction. It says later in Exodus that the sons and their sons and their sons would tell this story. That's what they knew about Pharaoh. Disobedience, death, and destruction. What did they know about Moses? When they tell that story, obedience, service, deliverance. This morning, when I read this, I thought about myself and I thought, how hard is my heart? Do I allow the sins in my life, chasing after work or chasing after sports or just doing this or doing that, do I allow that to harden my heart and not see the things that God has for me? I hope everyone in this room will take time this week and they will just examine their heart and ask God, make my heart soft. Make my heart hear you. I want to be open. I want to hear your word. I want to see where you lead me, because he has a plan for you. He has a timing for you. Hebrews 3:15 says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart as they did when they provoked me. Don't harden your heart. If you're out there and you're a Christian, seek for a soft heart. Look for ways that you can listen to him. If you're sitting out there and you're not saved and you don't know the Lord, like Pharaoh did not know him, don't harden your heart. Don't sit there in that pew or that seat and do nothing about it. There are people probably sitting next to you that'll talk to you about, how do I know this, Lord? Don't harden your heart. Don't lock them out.